Now, Hannah, you're asking about lion territories and how they've changed in the time that we've been at Djuma. So maybe what we can do is on the map here, we can kind of do some sort of time frames and sort of drawings of when things were and, well, how things were. We'll have to go back to a period of time. So I'm not going to go year by year, but I'll go back to a period of time. So let's call it the drought years. So I'll write here, that'll be 2015 to, let's say, 2019. Okay, so this is going to be the 2015 to 2019 rough line dynamics of what we would have seen. So we'll start from the far east. This whole section from here, if we look kind of coming down like this, through the sort of central parts, or the eastern parts of Buffelshoek, down through the central parts of Torchwood, and down into Nkoro. All right. This was the Torchwood Pride. So excuse my writing. All right. But the Torchwood Pride used to move in this kind of very long sort of cylindrical loop, and they would go into Kruger a little bit. Their movement was actually very much dictated to by the Nkuhuma Pride at that time. The Nkuhuma Pride pre-Cubs in 2016 used to hang around all of this Buffelshoek area, so they kind of would overlap. They'd come into Manyeleti here, so just kind of extend it out. I'm just drawing it on the map for the sake of drawing. They would come all the way around here, and then they would obviously come onto Djuma itself. They did come into Simambili a little bit, so this would have been this section here. Sorry, let me just add that. And then they would have come through here, and they actually used to extend all the way down to Nkoro, and then kind of come up like that. So that would be all Nkuma, plus Birmingham males. Remember, we're talking now, this is kind of the shift and change between the Matimbas and the Birminghams. The Matimbas first kind of came in, I mean, they were in here and they were kind of around, and then they got pushed out. And so this is the sort of range that the Birminghams and Nkuhumas used to move. And in fact, they went all the way along Simambili towards Ottawa, which would be down here somewhere. And then in the bottom side of Djuma, onto Chitwa, Little Gowrie, there's obviously a little bit of a crossover here, Arathusa, and down into Mala Mala was the Styx Pride. So sorry, my writing is a little bit skew. So that is basically the breakdown of what we had from a pride dynamic situation. There was, the Talamatis really didn't actually come in at all. They were not really a feature of this landscape at the time. There was another pride that we saw here. If you can imagine, this is Arathusa and Elephant Plains. So there was the Mangan Pride here. I'm just going to do an M. There's a lot of, I didn't make a big enough circle, so they would have just been on the fringes on this side, as well as the Salalas. So they would have been kind of there. So let's do an M plus T. So that was their kind of thing, right? At the time also, what we started to see was the Birminghams and the Majingalans, which were this side and down into Singita, Londolozi, Mala Mala. They were kind of starting to have little altercations, and this was the kind of layout that we ended up with. We then started to get, so this was like 2015, end of 2015. 2016 started to happen, and there was a slight change in the dynamic. The Nkuhumas actually shifted a little bit further to the south and expanded this territory out as the Styx kind of hung out more in Mala Mala at that period. So if we can sort of, I'm going to make lines for this, but the Nkuhumas came down and they started to hang out around like this. So let's do some lines there like that. So that became Nkuhumas of sort of 2016 when they had the Cubs. They expanded southwards, and that was because, if you think about it, the Birmingham males came out from the north and they started to expand their territories downwards, and as they did, they brought the Nkuhumas with them, and the Nkuhumas then had all their little babies here around camp during that 2016 period. So that was the kind of dynamic that we sort of were very used to for a number of years. Like I say, that was almost until about 2018, 2019, that it was pretty much what we're seeing here in terms of the traverse that we used to use. These were the three main prides that were around. Like I say, the Talamatis really didn't feature too much in our landscape at all. They would kind of stay up to the north in Manyeleti. And like I say, Matimbas went down, Majingalans went down, and the Birminghams kind of took over, and they eventually, the Birminghams kind of expanded all the way out the side too, and then they eventually started to go down into the Manyeleti. Right, then we'll go into sort of 2019, so I'm going to erase all of this. Hopefully you guys got some screenshots and you can understand kind of roughly what's going on. So let's get rid of all of this. I was a bit worried that maybe this wouldn't come off, but it seems like it's working. So that's all good. Let's get rid of all these lines. Somebody's going to get this map and be very upset that there's going to be green all over it, but well, it is what it is. A housekeeper. Oh, there goes a hyena. Did you see the hyena, Mpo? Hyena just walked past everywhere. That's quite cool. We don't have to go anywhere. Animals are coming to us right now. But yeah, we managed to clean it, and we've kind of written the new dates for the lions. And in terms of how the dynamic has changed, there's quite a lot in the way that it's shifted. And unfortunately, I wish I had a whole Sabi Sand map, because it would be much easier to just sort of show the exact extent of where everybody's moving. It's quite tricky from just this, because obviously we cut off at just the sort of Djuma traverse area, or Djuma Buffelshoek Torchwood section. But essentially the movement changed when the Birmingham males changed. What we ended up was a situation where these lions, when the males change, the females and their cubs have a huge big problem. So they have to start moving around and start getting to places where they get out of the way of the males, and you get a situation where they'll then follow wherever the males go. So as I was saying just now, in around 2018, 2019, the Birmingham males started to shift south. So they went down to Mala Mala and Londolozi and started to basically take over the Kambulo and Sevu pride and the Mangen pride. And from there, they started to mate, and they kind of left the Nkuhumas a little bit exposed, if I'm honest. The Nkuhumas had a bit of a tough time because they had no protection from those males. And what we then started to see is the Avoca males starting to shift down into Buffelshoek, where they obviously started to come into contact with various prides. Now, just prior to that whole shift and change, what we saw is when the Nkuhumas were denning on Djuma itself, so in the central area here, because they were denning here and they were on this property for a long time, I think we did, I don't even remember how many drives it was, but it was like, I think it was close to 80 drives, if I'm not mistaken, where the Nkuhumas didn't leave Djuma, which is pretty insane. So while they were stuck here, what we started to see was a pride shift in from the north. So as these arrows dictate for the Avocas, so the Talamatis also started to shift in and come and start to hang around, particularly in this sort of northern corner here around Big Dam, Kaya, and they kind of came around towards sort of Jordan's Dam and every now and then towards Jacana. So we had this kind of movement of this Talamati pride coming in. And then what started to happen is the Nkuhumas, because of that pressure of that Talamati coming down, they started to shift slightly down to follow the males that had fathered the cubs. And we started to see a movement of the Nkuhumas going southwards down towards Mala Mala. And so then what that did is it squeezed the sticks between the Nkuhumas and these big prides that were the Mangen and Kambula pride or Sevu pride, and so the sticks had to become nomadic, and so the sticks just went all over the place and they disappeared down into the southern part of the Sabi Sands in an area around Sabi and Lion Sands, much like Shasha has done, which by the way I got an update that Shasha's on Lion Sands for those of you that don't know. And so they went down. And so the Nkuhuma territory, as it stands right now, currently, so I'm going to kind of fast forward to current day so that I can just give you an idea of where everybody is. The Nkuhumas, as it currently stands, have split into, and I don't want to say that there's breakaway prides yet, because, you know, there's still a lot at play. Those 5 males are going to eventually go off on their own, and those females, Chela and the girls, are going to eventually come back. The 2 girls are going to, I'm sure, come back to the pride that has currently got the cubs, so the 3 females. Well, that's what my thought process is, but you never know. So I'm not going to call them a breakaway just yet. So we'll just add in the sub-adults because they're quite free roaming. But essentially what we're seeing from the Nkuhumas is the Nkuhumas really have kind of left this whole top Buffelshoek section. I mean, they go in around in Singa, but they come all the way down like this, and then they come off the map down here, Mala Mala, Londolozi, Elephant Plains, Arathusa, Simambili, and kind of back up into this section. So this is all NK, so we'll just do NK. What that meant is that during that period when the Avocas came down, so let's just put a plus for the Avocas, and this Avoca is Blondie and Mohawk. Also a correction from this morning, just while we're at all of this, is Blondie was not on the kill of that wildebeest. It was dark mane, and Blondie was at Arethusa airstrip, just so everybody knows. And that's why it makes more sense that the Talamatis were with dark mane rather than Blondie with dark mane. So this is the Evokers, this is Blondie and Mohawk that are there. And then this section up at the top is where the Talamatis have taken, right? So the Talamatis are inside Manyeleti, so they're up at the top here, where you see Manyeleti here. So they kind of come around and have taken all of this and are extending into Simbambili, Elephant Plains. And there's a bit of an overlap with these sub-adults as the Talamatis come back into Djuma and come round. Now this morning we actually had them over here, and they then bend into the Torchwood and all the way around like that. So that's Talamati. There we go. And they kind of split also into two groups at the moment, the ones with the cubs and the sub-adults, same as the Nkuhumas. In fact, the Nkuhumas are in three groups because Amber Eyes and Ridge Nose have gone all the way to Singita. Now, Linda, you're asking when prides have cubs, will the cubs split away from their mothers? So what we find is when prides get big, so we're talking in the Sabi Sands, the average sort of pride size here that seems to be sustainable is kind of 5 to sort of 8 females in a pride. That seems to be sustainable with obviously cubs coming off of that. We see that kind of working. When the cubs get bigger and we start to see female or male cubs, that number, let's say 5 females have 4 cubs each, that grows the pride very quickly and they lose some of the cubs and we start to settle at around 15. Let's call it 15 lines. Too many lines, so the sub-adults tend to split off, and it's normally the boys going and the girls kind of go with them, and that's when you can start to see split off of prides. And so if you take the Nkuhumas, for example, the 2016 cubs, the 3 females that survived, they split off from the main pride, had their 7 cubs, and they are now roaming around down here, and then the rest kind of hung out, and now they're starting to shift and move as well. Chella obviously with the sub-adults, and then like I said, Amber Eyes and Ridge Nose went down here, leaving their sub-adults with Chella. So that's kind of a good number. Anything over that in the Sabi Sands, they start to really struggle from a population or a food point of view. So you must understand that we don't have endless amounts of zebra, wildebeest, and buffalo. And so this number kind of seems to work for like kudu, waterbuck, wildebeest. They can kind of hang out and survive off that. Then the Torchwood Pride is still around this section, more so into the Kruger, coming down like this. So that's still the Torchwoods, plus the Kruger male over there. And then what we get, and I forgot a pride earlier on called the Shimungwe Pride that also hung around a bit. And then down here, there is a weird kind of thing. There's this 4-ways pride that comes here, so that's the 4-ways pride, and then the Nsevu and Kambulas, and now the Kambula sub-adults are starting to shift in from Mala Mala, coming up like this. All right, back into this area. So we're seeing quite a change in the dynamic, and most of the movement we're seeing is downwards, so movement from north to south, and that is purely based off the fact that we're getting a change in males, and our males are always coming from the north. If we go back in time, when I first started in the Sabi Sands in 2009, the Mapochos were here and around, and what happened was we then started to see the Majingalans come from the north. Following the Majingalans was the Matimbas, following the Matimbas, the Birminghams, following the Birminghams, the Evokers. So far, all the big coalitions have come from the north and into the Sabi Sands. And what that meant is as they expand their territory and they look for new females and new mating opportunities, they go down and they're dragging prides with them down. And as these splits are happening, so these females with cubs are going with the males, and we're seeing a movement southwards of most of our lines. Now, if we get a change in males coming from the south-north, it's going to be an opposite direction and an opposite effect. Even S8, if we think about that, from the north coming south, and so we're going to get a complete change in the movement of prides. At the moment, everything is moving downwards. There's also the other thing that you've got down here in the south is the Sand River. And so there's a lot of movement of buffalo towards the Sand River, which obviously the lions follow. Now, before I kind of carry on with our lions, just remember that we are going to be doing an AMA tomorrow night at 6:40 Central African time. no thunder, go away. So if you would like to join in the AMA and talk about rhinos with myself, then you can go and check that out. It is for explorers only, so if you have questions or comments, you can start submitting them already. Scan the QR code or go onto the website to do so. And then the following night, we're going to be doing a fireside chat. So there's 2 different things that you got to look out for, and both of those are for explorers. So essentially what we're seeing is a complete change in the dynamic, and what's kind of interesting right now is the number of male lions that are young within this whole sector right now. So we've got the 3, we'll say 3, the Telemates, all right, so Dark Mane and the 2 boys are there. And then we've got the 5 Inkuhumas, the 4 Insevu / Kambula males. And so that is, if you look at it, it's 12 male lions just hanging around in this section at the moment that are young and are going to start coming into their own in the next year. What that means is that S8, Blondie, Mohawk, and Dark Mane are all in for a very, very tough time. When you've got numbers, particularly 5 and 4, they've got the numerical advantage if they come across 1. Even this Kruger male, he's going to have a tough time. And we know north of us here in Ngala is the white lion male and his brothers, and they have been coming south. They were seen in the center of Manyaleti the other day, which is far down, and is not actually a long walk to here. And if the pattern continues, it's very possible that that white lion and his brothers could end up down here too. So there's a lot of upheaval that's going to take place around male lions at the moment. It's going to be very interesting to see how they all settle and what that means for the prides. The one thing that has changed drastically between the 2 time periods that I was talking about in terms of the prides is the size of the prides. What the Evokers have done, and the Birminghams, but in fact both of them, is something that the Mapojos couldn't do. And even the Matimbas to a degree, and the Majingalans, is that's to protect prides long enough for cubs to be raised. So if we look at all these prides, the splits are happening because the prides are growing, right? So these males have somehow managed to keep their prides, the areas around their prides stable enough for cubs to be raised to a certain point, and so the pride numbers have all grown. When I first came in 2009, the Mapojos were on their rampage, and they obviously hammered a lot of the prides, and we got a situation where we got a number of cubs that came down and got killed, and the numbers of lions were quite small. None of the prides were too big. And if I go back to those days, if we go back to sort of like 2010, 11, 12 in this area, it was the sticks that we saw. The Inkuhumas were here in the Manyaleti and sometimes came onto Buffelshoek, but the other pride that we saw mostly was actually a Salala breakaway, which was the original tailless female, and then the 4 sub-adults that eventually became the Mangan pride. So what you see here with Torchwoods and Telemates and Inkuhumas was not like this at all. So it's completely different makeup of prides now in this area, and that's all just due to the fact that there's been male changes. And so wherever the males come from now, whether it be coming from the south, the east, the north, that's going to dictate the movement of these prides again, and we're going to see a shift and a change. And because we've now got these splits, it's going to be super interesting to see where all of these lionesses with cubs start to settle and where the splits start to go. But I have a funny feeling that the Telemates and the Inkuhumas, once the boys leave, so all of these boys start to go and go in their own separate ways and start to go and try and dominate somewhere, we're going to see a lot of those females starting to come back together again, because actually it's not a huge number of females that are splitting off. But if, hypothetically, they start to mate with different males, so let's say the Inkuhumas somehow get taken over by S8 because of pressure from the north, and a new coalition of males takes over the Telemates, and they kill those cubs and they mate with those 3, but these sub-adults from the Telemates, the females, are not ready to mate, then you'll see a split taking place, because they're going to have a situation where different males, and therefore they cannot join together, because the males will then be a danger to their cubs. So that's what's going to dictate what the next step is for all of our lions and where they all go. But it's incredible to see just how far down they've come. And like, this map obviously is not to scale, so it's difficult to show an exact scale. I would love, if it would be really cool if we could have had an animated board here that we could have input the data and then watch the territory shape move down, as it did in a kind of computer simulated way. That would have been very, very, very interesting. But that gives you a rough idea of what the movements have been. But I reckon that we're going to see a change soon, because these male lions that we've got here have lived a really good life of late. They haven't had to worry too much in terms of competition, and they haven't had to fight too much. But we're starting to see now massive overlaps between dark mane, S8, Blondie, Mohawk, and even this Kruger male coming in onto the cut line the other day is going to show that there's going to be a change soon, and somebody is going to come into contact with one another. So really interesting dynamics ahead for the lions, and I think that's probably about it for the lions, and we'll try and do leopards next, and see all the changes that have happened there.